Ooh. That's just what I need. Crease the cover of the book.
It's our pleasure to be sitting here on a beautiful morning in the desert with the author of Zindar the Barbarian, who is also, it was written by Bruce Benefiel, but it was also talking about someone whose name is called Zindar, son of Ashtar, or Zin, and these are all the same person. Is that correct?
It is, and trust me, I'm not polyphrenic, although I think all of us do have various aspects of our personalities, our character, fragments of our soul that are trying to combine and coalesce and become one within these bodies that we call human. And it's Zendor, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, my sister called me Zendork. So
okay, all right.
So it's been a very interesting journey in becoming acquainted with myself and those names and how they apply.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about each?
Well, let me start way back in the beginning first. I was orphaned at birth, adopted at 6 weeks, and my given name at that point was Bruce Lee Benefiel, and some wonderful, absolutely wonderful parents that I had. And Benefiel actually means good fidelity, so it was a great surname to get. Bruce means dweller of the thicket, and I seem to always get in the thicket of things.
And we could trust that you would do that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
In a beneficial way, though.
You're good for more. That's for those of you who are older and remember the beneficial commercials. So as I grew up, I had a lot of different types of experiences, voices, visitations, dreams. A lot of those things were really difficult for a young man, young boy, to negotiate with in this reality, and having no one to really speak to about them. The first time I had a visitation, I was 6 years old, and the voice simply said, "Hey, you." And my mother happened to be 15, 20 feet away, and I spun around and asked her if she heard the voice, and she said, "No, must have been a peeping Tom." And I knew better. And the voice was, I recognized it was from deep within me. And yet it sounded all powerful and not at all scary. So I went through my young adult life, and then summer of '88, I was with a friend. We'd gone to a full moon meditation out in Fountain Hills here in the valley, and had returned from that, and he was a founder of a local church. He was running our guest house at the time, and we were sitting out in front of it after the meditation. It probably was 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, and our conversation, quite deep as it was, fell silent for a little bit. I closed my eyes, I went inside, and I asked the question, "Who am I?" And just, out of the blue. Of course, I'd always had that question. And he turns to me and says out loud, "You are Zendor." Same instant, my second sight comes on, and I see this wonderful starscape with a huge stone arched doorway and this thick wooden door slowly opening toward me. And I heard, "Door to what is?" Now, in all reality, what the heck do you do with that? Okay, you're sitting there, you have that experience, it's undeniable that it's happening. And from the inner, whether it was telepathy or prayer or whatever it was that got transferred over to him and enabled him to answer me verbally that internal question, somebody's listening. So, again, what do you do with that? So I stuck it on the shelf. And
so you obviously heard it, you registered it, but you didn't do much. You set it on the shelf for the time being. Was that it?
Yeah, I acknowledged that it happened. And beyond that, there wasn't much more I could do with it. It did tie into some earlier experiences that I'd had, and a question that I had as a teenager. I got down on my knees and prayed to know what truth was, and I was willing to die for it if necessary. And I'll be darned if the following week, that voice I was familiar with since childhood asked me, "Mrs. Bruce, are you willing to die for what you believe in?" And, my first thought was, oh shit. My second was Christ consciousness, and my third was cosmic consciousness. And I said yes. Immediately left my body and was taken into the white light. Was there for a few moments. Was an impetuous teenager. I realized that there had to be more because it was pretty empty. I could see white. I had no tactile sensation, but I could think, so I knew I wasn't dead. So as soon as I asked the question, is there more? Then I moved into a sphere of pinpoints of light and recognized those as points of consciousness, and then was told that those were the ones that I was to work with in order to help facilitate a new world order, and it would happen in my lifetime.
Oh, you became Republican.
I did. Hey, Indiana was a red state at the time, so, my parents are still Republicans.
Don't feel bad. I voted for both Bushes, but then I stopped. But I voted against them the second time, both times too.
Well, you learned. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. But I was fooled twice.
Hey,
by generations anyway.
Sure. Some things just need to happen, and in order to progress the rest of it. So after that incident with the stone arch doorway and the wooden door and the voice, a couple years later, I found myself producing and hosting a television show. It's called One World, and we designed it so we would peer into the depths of what keeps us afraid, angry, ignorant, and immobile. And how we did that was I introduced the folks, got them to talk about their backgrounds, how they got where they were at, what prompted them to do what they were doing from both inner and outer perspectives, how they found that to work together, what fears they had to overcome, how they overcame them, how they saw that fitting with the environment that they were in, whether it was a work or play or whatever, mostly work and professional arenas, and then how they saw others being affected by them and being able to overcome their own fears and learn how to work together collaboratively. And then I finished with the questions of, okay, in this global village, how do you see it coming together, and how do you see the barriers falling to it, and what practical advice you can give for everyday living. So it was really a rich and robust education, not only for me, but for our audience as well.
Well, the exercise is one that we are, culturally speaking, rarely taken through, and as a result of that, I believe, culturally again speaking, we are typically underprepared to deal with let's say unusual or different situations, disagreements, things like that. We tend to take a very reductionist approach.
We do.
To the extent of who has the most strength, power, or weapons, as opposed to diplomacy, who's willing to listen.
I would even take it down to a more basic level. You have 2, 3 influencers as a child. You have your parents, you have your church, if you go, and you have your school. And so with that combination, and having taught, I taught high school for 5 years, inner city schools, special ed, regular ed. I had full charge of a couple of curriculums in charter schools, and I taught at a residential treatment center as well. What I found was that these kids are ill-prepared to negotiate with their own emotions in order to find a place that creates cohesion in a group. It's awfully easy to dissent and to create argument, to be competitive instead of cooperative and collaborative. Now, these are things that later on team sports sort of teach, but early on in the formative development and child development years, we don't nurture the positive aspects of the child, the imagination, the critical thinking, the evaluation, the ability to understand that others are speaking from their dictionary, and that we may not have the same dictionary in our hands, even though it's still English.
We may have the same words, but the meaning is a different story.
Right, because that's all internalized in how we develop, how we grow up.
And context. You can even have the same meaning, different context.
Absolutely.
Nuances are amazing.
Absolutely. So with that show, about 6 episodes in, I think, we did over 100 over a 3-year period. And that's online, too, at youtube.com/Be the Dream LLC. You can see some of those there. So, half a dozen shows into it, the guys on the set start calling me Zen, because I used my real name, Bruce Benefiel, as the host, and Zendor as a subheading, as kind of a door to what is, because I was opening it up for a lot of people. And what I found was, through that show, that there is a golden thread of how we develop, of how we overcome our fears and move forward towards whatever personal and professional success that we desire. And most of that, the essence is learning how to ask the right questions and learn how to shut up and listen. So until those answers come. Now, that's a very challenging place for most people, because we're used to the rapid fire and rapid pace of society, the do it now, the muck enlightenment, the gotta have it now consumerist society that we've developed and we're spreading globally. That's one of the things that I feel is necessary to begin to curtail, and some of the things I'm getting from my off-planet associations, that they too are hoping to get it through to us that we need, first of all, to learn to get along with each other. We cannot heal our planet until we heal ourselves, and that's an individual basis. We have to really look inside and get comfortable with not knowing.
Oh, and admitting that we don't.
Right.
Because we go through a lot of exercise in acting as though we know, when all we're doing at very best is guessing.
Right.
And oftentimes our best guess is actually making the problem worse. And yet we don't want to admit that either. We're doing this soft shoe over and over and over again.
Don't step on my blue suede shoes now.
Exactly. And they talk about down the rabbit hole as having a different different connotation these days, in terms of
Absolutely.
Where that rabbit hole leads. It's actually time, as I see it, is to come up out of the rabbit hole now.
Speaking of the rabbit hole, excellent segue. Zendor, son of Ashtar and Athena. What the heck is that about? Well, as a contactee, I began having experiences as a kid. I was kind of led through from the voice I told you about already to out-of-body experiences at 7 years old, where I had to come to terms with that separation or sense of separation,
right,
and fear of death that I had to overcome. And the voice was right there saying, just relax, it's okay. So I took a breath and had that first OBE. Year later, I started having experiences in the middle of the night where I would wake up in the corner of my bedroom, looking down at my physical body, and I would watch my physical body get out of bed, open my bedroom window, climb out, walk across the backyard of the neighbors, over to the edge of a field, climb the fence, walk out into the center of this 10-acre cow pasture, basically, and rise up into this orange cigar-shaped cloud.
Wait a minute. Let's back up here. Your consciousness was up, elevated separated from your body,
Right.
and you observed your body doing this. Am I getting this right?
Right. We basically have, as I understand it, we have three aspects of ourselves. Okay.
At
Not
least.
not just Bruce Zen and Zendor. Okay. We have the participant, we have the observer, and then we have the observed. Okay, so there's another aspect. It's like when you become aware that you're thinking. Oftentimes we don't think about what we're thinking, we just think. Okay, so there's that third party sale going on. You know. And so in that, I was aware that I was aware that I was watching. And this happened once a month for a couple of years. And I would never come back with a memory of what was inside of the cloud. I would always come to the perimeter, and the observer and the participant would become one, go into the cloud, and I'd wake up in bed the next morning, sometimes with nosebleeds, which was a characteristic that I wasn't aware of then. It wasn't until I was getting ready to move to Phoenix that I was walking through a metaphysical bookstore in Muncie, Indiana, and this book fell off a shelf in front of me. There was nobody else around. Okay, now I've had weird shit happen before, but you know, it's always nice when it does, because it's so rare that it does. And it was one of those just, you know, pregnant moments. So I walk over and I look at the book, and it's Ruth Montgomery's Aliens Among Us. And I thought, interesting. So I pick it up, turn it over to where it's open, and my eyes are taken to this paragraph that, paraphrased, says the most common UFO contactee experiences in the Midwest were with the orange cigar-shaped clouds in the late 50s and early 60s. Hadn't even considered it until that point. I was 23 at the time. And I call it the domino effect. It lined up a lot of those points of order that I'd experienced, the experiences that I'd had, and it made them make sense for that nanosecond in a non-linear way.
It was kind of like a moment of synthesis. All of these experiences that you'd had now came together into an understanding, a knowing of what was going on.
Right. Well, and you know, your viewers may have some things like that too, where there's noticeable moments where these nonlinear, you know, there are points of time in their lives that all of a sudden line up, and there's a train of thought that makes absolute perfect sense for a moment, and then it's gone.
Yes, yes. A moment of clarity.
Right.
You know, comprehension. Yes, I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you can call it by many names. So then later on, once I moved to Phoenix, there were numerous occasions that put me more into this Galactic Federation limelight, in that I didn't necessarily pursue it. It pursued me. Maybe not pursue, it I guess evolved from within me, and not only, because it's easy to make shit up. The real validation of it comes when others reflect it without you saying a word. That's what I find to hold the most value and the most evidence of something actually being true. We still may not understand it, but it's there for us to look at and go, interesting. So one of those interesting points was I was working for a group, or with a group called the New Age Alliance. We had 35 member groups and we're growing. It was an idea to bring these quote-unquote New Age groups, churches, businesses, practitioners together under one umbrella to demonstrate what we felt this new age of enlightenment was in the way of accountability and responsibility to self and others. And we put on an event at the Biltmore called A Metaphysical Coming Together. I don't know if it was the first large metaphysical event in the Valley, but it may have been. This was in September, October of 1988. So,
wow, yeah,
it was ways back.
Stone Ages there, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and
not really.
but we didn't get stoned. No, we didn't inhale anyway. Yeah. So in doing this, there were several things. I was part of it as an investigator for the Alliance. I would go out to the member groups that were seeking admission or membership, and I would qualify them. I'd just check them out, see what their values and ethics and morals and all those kinds of things were, and see if they were a good fit. Well, I took my daughter to one of them, and she was 8 at the time, I believe. And this guy, his name was Lawrence Schmidt, channeled an entity named Jabbar, and a wonderful guy, just really good energy, nice looking. We had a short discussion before the group meeting. He went off and changed into his emerald green robe, which was pretty cool, and then went into his full body channeling. He actually would stand up and walk around, and I'd seen a lot of channelers. I'd listened to them. Some I connected with, others I thought just, why am I here? What's this crap coming out of the mouth? So Crystal and I were sitting in the back of the room, and he walked around the room and was talking to various individuals, and he walked over in front of me, looked at me square in the eyes, and said, "You're still looking for your parents, aren't you?" I hadn't said anything. So I knew at that moment something was going on beyond my understanding, and it was definitely of value. And my reply was, well, yeah, I've given up my biological or my terrestrial search because I haven't been able to find them. I'd offered or gone to more of the celestial search, looking for my, celestial parentage. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, that's good and righteous, but you'd still like to know their names, wouldn't you? And I said, well, sure. And he said, well, okay, they are. And he says, Ashtar and Athena. Now, my mind at the time blocked it. So all I heard was and And I'm sitting there embarrassed because I didn't hear what he said, and so I had no way of asking more questions or anything like that. And I just said, thank you. And then I turned to my daughter and I said, what did he say? And I didn't know if she'd heard. She said, Ashtar and Athena. I was like, oh. Well, about that same time, I had an article published in it was called the Arizona Light. It was a metaphysical newspaper. And so when it came out, I was looking for it. And so this must have been in August, I think, of '88. And I found my article, and down below it was this display ad of pictures of Stephen and April White, who were going to channel Ashtar and Athena at the Roadway Inn at the Metro Center in a week and a half or something like that.
Uh-huh. Boy, I talk about synchronicity again.
Absolutely. So, I'm paying attention. So I think to myself, okay, something over the side trying to keep is going on here, and I need to go explore further. And Steve and April go into their things. I go to the meeting. Out. There's probably, I don't know. He stands up, maybe upwards of 150 people. Is channeling Ashtar, and he's talking about how the administration is set up in the Federation and the Ashtar Command, and I'm getting it all. I understand it.
This is making sense to you.
Absolute
even though
sense.
It's new to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like I knew this already. And he's eyes closed, okay, channeling. But he's looking at me. And exorbitant amount of time focus on me, so much so that I thought, if he opens his eyes and he continues to looking at me, I'm going to be on the spot in this room, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that. And about the time I thought that, he opens his eyes up, and he's staring right at me, and he doesn't break the gaze for probably 10 minutes as he's talking. Mm-hmm. I mean, he would look around the room occasionally, but he would come back on me, and I was, everything just in the depths of my being resonated. And then April got up and did the same thing. Mm-hmm. Only hers was more from being the feminine. It was more from the emotional side of how we process and what the difference is between the galactic awareness, which begins in oneness, as compared to the planetary consciousness, which is in duality. So, there's a segue that they are in charge of helping those who have incarnated here to perform to their best capacity in what they have agreed to do at a soul level on this planet during this period.
And it would be correct to say that on a soul level is synonymous to being on a level of oneness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So even though we, you could say, individuate, we come into and we take these what appear and what are perceived to be individual units of beingness.
Threads in the galactic tapestry.
Exactly. We're not aware of...
Or strings.
Yes. So we're not aware of...
Hawkins might say.
We're not aware of the connectivity to others, but nonetheless, it is to fulfill an objective
right.
that is oneness-based, if you will, and oneness-centered.
Absolutely. We are experiencing... Even science is getting on the bandwagon now because with quantum mechanics, they're beginning to understand quantum entanglement, which when we have those experiences of oneness or those synchronicities, which are indicators that there's something that's out of frame with our linear experience and therefore probably beyond our understanding in the moment, and yet nevertheless happening. Because there are those, you feel, you see, the five senses are engaged. And yet there's something more that is driving that experience that we may not grok at the time. So quantum entanglement then allows us a scientific framework to begin to look at, for instance, how the Holy Spirit operates and moves us to do and be whatever is appropriate in that moment, when we can step out of our own way and become available as a servant or as a mediator, as a medium, as a channeler, as a leader, as a facilitator. All of those things, there's an essence in the core that we have, that point of light that's within us, that's actually still just a shell because the void's inside of that, and that's where everything emanates from, is in that silence. And as we come out into this world and we manifest that energy that is us and that is our thoughts, because that's the consciousness.
That's the true currency of creation is thought.
Right.
When you really get down to it, those are
the Bible calls it the word,
but
sure. It's really thought. Okay, so as we come to terms with understanding how we think and feel, it's imperative, and not just how we think and feel, but the awareness of being able to have the choice of how we think and feel in any given moment. Am I going to talk to you as a competitor or as someone that I think is arrogant and abusive and full of yourself? Or am I going to speak to that part of God within you that I know is there too? Okay, so there's the two choices. You can get your ego involved, and not that it's a bad thing, the little ego, there's a big ego, and that's part of we-go. And if we go together, then we're not separate.
Well, yeah, you have the other element when you talk in terms of a oneness is the sense that in the same scenario that you mentioned, as far as do I look at this person as an ego, full of himself, etc., it would suggest that I do not understand that one is literally a projection of me.
Exactly.
So if I judge that person as being all of those things, they are just an image. They are a projection of I'm judging myself.
The Mayans have a great phrase. It's called, and it's a greeting, in Lak'ech. What it means is, I am another you. The Hindus, Namaste. I worship that which is within you. Shalom. All of those greetings are designed to recognize the essence of who we are at the core of our being. Okay? Unfortunately, most of us don't get any further into our bodies than here. You know, we're stuck in the head. We're stuck in our own thinking, and we don't know how to get outside of the box. Well, one way is to see, what I found anyway, is to look at that a little differently. Understand, for instance, the nature of our thinking as religion has based it, and there's at least a couple of different religions that talk about Satan. Well, Satan actually comes from the Greek word thetan. It means thinker. So, using classic Chinese philosophy of creating a fictitious enemy and dividing the population amongst themselves so that then you can manage them, that's what Constantine did. And in my discussion, this might blow some people's minds, but you know, I do have a living testimony of Jesus Christ in that he is real, and I had a discussion with him on that very subject. First of all, he addressed my fears, which are the same as his, and that's completing my divine mission. Secondly, I asked him, what about Satan? Am I getting this correct? He said, yeah. He said, my battle in the desert was with my own mind of learning how to shut up and get out of the way and follow what was internal. And, you know, we call that God's voice, the Father's will, whatever, you know. There's lots of different terminologies that are used for that sensation. So again, we have that choice of whether to argue with ourselves in our head or learn how to come down and be in our bodies. They're a multisensory array. The more we pay attention to them, the more we can hear, see, feel, sense in our environment, because we're subtle energy, you know. And if you look at it from a quantum perspective, in between those particles, whether they're waving or not, is space.
Right.
We have more space in our atoms than we do material. So if that space then is the consciousness that we haven't been paying attention to, how do we? How do we engage that? How do we find ourselves in that? And this goes back to the silence. I'm a musician, I play drums, and one of the things that one of my musical cohorts told me initially, or requested initially, he says, learn to play the space between the notes, and we'll be fine.
Sure.
So, you know,
that's the silence.
Yeah, and I think when you're, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi wrote a book called Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience. In that, he akins this experience to being like a jazz ensemble that's doing improv music, and you just lose yourself in the moment. You have no idea how long you play, but you're all there together.
Right, and you don't even know where you're going to go. You just go, because you're in the moment.
Yeah. There is no leader, because it's shared.
There's a oneness.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Understood. Now, there are a couple things that you've opened up here.
Can of worms?
Well, yeah.
Besides that, you mean?
Probably a barrel of them.
Yeah.
But one of them has to do with...
Maybe it's monkeys.
Yeah, sure. So one is the contactee experience.
Right.
One is the relationship with off-planet civilizations, Ashtar et al., federations, and then also it's just the book itself that you wrote. So I mean, let's talk about.
Okay, let me see if I can break that down into those three. So first of all, the the contactee experiences. One of the coolest, and would probably be most frightening to other people. I woke up one night, this is during the time when I was producing the show, 1991, don't remember the month. I wake up on a steel gurney on board a ship with electrodes stuck in my sphincter. And I'm laughing at it. And don't ask me why. I was embarrassed. Okay, because I wake up, I see these things, and there are these 3 tall Zetas that are shoved up against the wall. And I can, after understanding the energy of laughter, they don't know how to control that. And so they are more subtly impacted energetically than we are. So they're shoved up against the wall because of my laughter. Because most of the time people show up in fear. And so they use that to anesthetize or paralyze the body so that the individual doesn't hurt themselves or others. And because on a soul level, there's been agreement for this all to happen, even though we may not
have occurred otherwise. Yes,
absolutely. So I'm laughing. I'm like, come on, guys, what do you think you're doing? And I'm pulling these things out, and I get to the last one, and it stings. And I'm in my bed. Now, boom, just that quick. I knew that I had been on board that ship in that instant, and I severed the connection when I pulled that last electrode out. So I'm laying in bed thinking, shit, how do I go back? You know, because I really wanted to return. Because these guys, I'd been around them for a while and I knew it, but here was an opportunity that I just felt so sad that I had missed. And so I'm thinking about how to go back. I go back inside, I close my eyes, and I'm trying to go back, and I have no idea how I'm going to do this. So the intent evidently brought another character into play. It was an androgynous human looking with a male voice, and he says to me in this darkness, and he and I meet, and he says, next time just relax. We're just trying to tune you up so we can communicate more easily. And at the instant he said that, it all made sense scientifically. Now, why, you might ask? Well,
why?
The perineum. If and nurses, you know, people in the health field, you'll know what that is. It's a nerve that connects directly into the spinal column, and it ends in the sphincter. So it's the only direct connect into our central nervous system that's on our body.
It's the least invasive way of getting there. Would that be accurate?
To them,
yeah,
you know,
what I mean. Yeah,
to us, it's that classic anal probe that everybody's scared to death of. Okay, because they don't understand it. So,
and there's just an anal aversion anyway, you know, so to speak.
So, yeah, we are so backward.
Anal
we are
about
so
that.
anal. Yeah, exactly. So, scientifically, then, if you're going to adjust the vibratory rate of a given central nervous system, which is all energy anyway, even though it's in some physical conduits, how would you do that? Well, you'd plug in and you'd use whatever technology you have to adjust. So this is what they were trying to do. Now, I blew it,
so to speak.
so to speak, and yeah, and it wasn't a fart, but at the same time, you know, there was that understanding that was imparted to me that it's there, that they are communicating with me at some level, which explained a lot of the dreams and things that I was having that felt like I was someplace different, but yet there was that a lack of lucidity in the segue from the dream to waking consciousness.
You know, there's an interesting correlation to that, and I think in terms of a radio receiver. You know, the receiver is basically an instrument that allows you to tune into various stations, various programs. You don't really buy it because of what it is physically, but you manipulate it physically to to get the various channels that you're specifically interested in getting.
Right.
And so its condition, its technology determines the bands that it can pick up. But it seems, it tracks that someone with sufficient knowledge could address certain areas on the physical body, which itself is not you.
Right.
It is also your instrument in the same
Right.
way that a radio receiver or a television receiver is an instrument. And yet with the proper knowledge, they can go certain places, make certain adjustments, and then that would affect the perceptions that can come and be picked up and
Right.
interpreted and communicated to you and through you.
Which brings up another situation that happened a few months later. Ties right in. I came home from a gathering. It was called Mystic Moments. Louis Russo, really neat guy, had put together these metaphysical gatherings, and they were quite large. So I come home from it, and I lay down on my couch, and all of a sudden I'm in a discussion with my guide, Zephyr, who I've known since I was a teenager.
Was that the voice in the beginning? Was Zephyr the one that said, you're Zindor? Or
My perception is possibly.
Okay.
Because there's still, I still have a question about that, because I have a much closer relationship with him than I do the voice.
All right.
If that makes sense.
All right. Well, then it sounds to me that the voice is a different one.
It's all connected. Okay. But Zephyr, I mean, I've seen his face. We've had interactions. Well, anyway, he shows up. We have a discussion. We're in this interior garden, and he gives me this headdress, and he tells me that I've earned it, and yada yada. And we have a little discussion, and afterwards I get up and I bow to the west, which Zephyr means, westerly wind, so I respect him from that way. And so as I bowed in thankfulness, my inner sight comes on, and I see this circle open up above my head, and I see 3 different tiers of what look like ringside seats, so to speak, with these beings looking over the edge down at me. But right before that happened, I see this white light come down and go through my crown and split and form a rainbow sparkled half sphere grid around me. And so then when I look back up, I see these folks up there, and I'm asking, okay, what the heck's going on now? And as they're in that nonlinear place, I don't recall exactly what the discussion was, but I remember feeling these various places in my body being almost like a piezoelectric current being run through them. And at the end of it, when the rainbow grid folded up and went up and the portal closed, I heard that this is your tree of life. And so at the time, I didn't quite understand all the Kabbalic or the Kabbalistic understanding of the tree of life and what all. I had a cursory understanding of it. But when they said that, it made me realize, oh, yeah, okay, the tree of life is actually in our body. Those points of order that they've externalized are actually, like the meridians and chakras and things in our bodies, that is in it too. So you've got the chakra system and the tree of life that are in there working together to bring us into our fullness of being, at which point, to my understanding, we move beyond what we understand as death.
Mm-hmm. That's right, yes.
And so that's a concept that is so far out there for most people, even though they profess to believe that to be so. When it comes to them as, okay, you want to do that? You believe that? All right, here's what you got to do. And it's a discipline that goes beyond any discipline I have ever experienced. And I've played football, baseball, basketball, golf, track. I've done martial arts. And obviously I've got a scientific background. I've got a couple of master's degrees in business. So even with that kind of voracious, brilliant intellect that's an edgeaholic, I am Zen and I'm an edgeaholic, there's so much more for me. So if I can't grok it, how can I really articulate that experience in a way that others can at least have an inkling of understanding when it sounds so incredulous? Because there's no direct experience, for the most part, or at least, up until recently. In the last decade, that's all changed. So your second question, or your first question to finish up on that, was about the contactee experiences. Probably the most magnificent was just after I was announced as the son of Ashtar and Athena at a gathering up in Camp Verde called the Gathering of Souls. There was a couple hundred people there. It was a little intimidating, and I'll get back into that as I'm talking about the Federation more. What happened was that for 4 nights in a row, I was taken up on board this magnificent ship, and I was in an auditorium with, I'm guessing, several hundred different life forms. I don't necessarily like to call them extraterrestrials, and I'm more inclined to call them intraterrestrials because it's all inside, or at least has been for me. For the most part, there's still that segue that comes out into the world. And we'll get there as a collective at some point, I'm sure. What happened, though, is that I had various different perspectives. I was essentially emceeing this activity all week long that was a process of talking about the rules and responsibilities, protocols, processes, procedures, all engaging first contact. And these were all Galactic Federation representatives. And so I'm introducing different people to talk about specific things on every given night. And I had multiple perspectives. I'd watch myself doing it. I'd be inside my body looking in the audience. I would be an observer of the entire thing from the back of the room. And, there was just all of this. It seemed like a dream, but very elaborate. And it continued on those various nights, the next 4 nights, started on, I think, February 12th or 13th. And at the end of it, I'm presented a plaque that has it's about a ½ inch thick maybe, had 2 little square buttons on the lower right and left, and just inside and above that had a stylized right and left eye of Horus, and it was stylized so that it looked like the eyes were cushions on a chair.
Okay.
And on each one of those, on the left one was the sign of Alpha, and on the right one was the sign of Omega. Up in about 2/3 of the way up was a large circle that had 2 rotating, feathered-looking swastikas, or as Jose Arguelles would call them, feathered serpent medicine wheels. And they were spinning in opposite directions, but it was translucent. You could see through it. And they gave this to me as an honorarium for facilitating this 4-day-long conference. Okay, so that leads me into talking a little bit more about Ashtar and Athena and the Federation and the Ashtar Command. So I'm trying to follow your questions. In that Okay, as best as I can describe it, is that these are, Ashtar and Athena, are levels of consciousness that I don't know that we can really comprehend yet. Now, there are layers of consciousness. I actually have a CD that a meditation that I put together that's based on a process developed by William Swigard back in the 50s. And it's called multi-level awareness, or multi-plane awareness, I'm sorry. There's actually two of them. The other one's multi-level. And what this technique does is it allows the experiencer to explore the dimensions and planes of consciousness within them, of which there's essentially 9 between this body and the next layer of white light. And in each one of those layers or planes, we have a body. It's functional. It has the senses just like we do here, only they are slightly different. Okay, it's like a rainbow, and you have different, each color is a different world. And in those worlds, there's operations that take place, and there's a life. Okay.
Well, in a keyboard, you got a scale, and you have octaves. So you got C's, you got middle C, you got high C, but you have octaves within that scale. You can operate independently within a single octave,
right?
And yet at the same time, you can.
And it has optics too.
Yeah, God, I got this thing about that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it really does.
And optics.
Optics, because you're seeing each with a different eye, so to speak, and whether it's the personal or the inner. In that process, we have the capacity to at least experience a snippet of the reality of each one of those planes of consciousness. Okay. Now, when I first experienced it, there was a facilitator. It was done live, and I got to the end. I'd been through the 9 planes and into the white light and slightly beyond it, and then I got the cue to get ready to come back. Well, I took that to like, oh, okay, we're done. I'm back in my body, and I opened my eyes up, and I turned to look at the facilitator, and he goes, uh-oh. And I, not knowing, said, what's the matter? He said, well, you were supposed to drop your bodies off on the way back in. That's the design of the process. And I said, oh, well, I'm back. And I had a party in my room for a couple of weeks after that because I didn't drop them off. And I had no idea what was going on. It wasn't until I had a friend of mine spend the night that was a practicing psychic. I also had a doctorate in metaphysics. And she woke up in the middle of the night, sat straight up in bed, said, my God, how can you sleep in here? There's got to be at least a dozen different beings in this room. And it wasn't until that point that I realized that was me. And so I'm working on trying to integrate all of this. Okay? So that was in 1989. And
well, it's hard to integrate when you got to conceptualize it first.
Yeah, how does anyone create a manageable reality when there's no foundation, there's no belief system, there's no conceptual reality that's been presented for you to pull from? It's just there.
Well, you're right. I also believe, however, that is part of, you might say,
letting go.
Well, no. I'm going to say that's part of the problem that humanity faces here, because we function with an idea or a notion that we've got all this stuff figured out.
Yeah.
When we think that way, anything that is beyond what we've figured out becomes problematic, and so we end up trying to deny it, denounce it, or in some kind of way. I'm trying to come up with another D. Okay, but
I have a term for that.
Yeah.
It's called butt pucker.
Yeah.
I call it the butt pucker syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where we just clench. Our
Yes.
entire body locks up because our thoughts lock up.
Right. We diminish. There's a 3
Right,
Ds. I knew
exact-
that.
it's
Diminish,
perfect,
deny,
perfect.
denounce, etc.
Right.
Okay. And the thing about it, though, is that our
Tearing a little bit from the sunlight. That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah, our institutions, science, religions, plural.
Right.
Sciences, religions, our education system, from low to high, they are all working. They're not acknowledging and dealing with these realities.
We've never had to. You know, we've done the best that we can given our experience, our technology, and our understanding to date. We cannot find fault in that, and anyone who constantly points their fingers at others forgets there's 3 coming right back at them. So, Adam, you and I and others like us tend to understand that, and so we recognize that this too shall pass, that it's all part of something that has been going on for a very long time and will continue to go on for a very long time. We even, you know, I was surprised just recently, since we're in January of 2013 now, we just passed the infamous winter solstice of 2012 and the end of time. Well, there's all kinds of doomsday scenarios that were wrapped around that. And there's also an aspect of, and this leads back into the multiplane awareness, there's an aspect of consciousness that we don't understand that is tied into the cycles of time. And we are in a segue between the Piscean age and the Aquarian age. Jose Arguelles, who I'd met at one point in time, just a wonderful individual, he had made a statement about, we're in this segue. It's a 50-year segue. It started on August 16th and 17th of 1987 with the harmonic convergence. The apex was the winter solstice of 2012. Now we've got 25 years on the other side of that. So as we're waxing our level of intelligence and consciousness to finally get that there is this quantum entanglement and oneness that many are experiencing from multiple dimensions and levels of consciousness and reality, to the waning of that now, which means we need to put into practice what our skill sets have given us the ability to do. Okay, and this is where the Federation comes in and says, from the dimensions that I've experienced, look, you guys are responsible. You can do what's necessary. You have to do what's necessary. We are not going to step in and change the world for you. It's not up to us. This is the development process of a planetary civilization, and it happens throughout the universe. We will not affect that in any way, shape, or form. We will not intercede. Okay, period.
You know, tain't wise to do.
No, we don't learn anything that way, and we're still teenagers. We think we know everything and don't know what to pull out of our ass to get forward. You know.
Well, I think we have, and perhaps this is the beginning of much of these changes, because, you know, there have been people throughout the last age, the last 2,000 years. At the beginning of that age, for one thing, and you had one conversation with that being named Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
He demonstrated. He laid out some principles, some ideas, some concepts. He demonstrated the. He put them into practice.
Listen to my words. You won't taste death. Anything's possible to those who believe. Anything I can do, you can do, and more. how much more do we need? You know, love thy neighbor as thyself.
Exactly. So 2,000 years ago, he demonstrated it, and then over the course of that 2,000 years of human history, after the powers that be at the time took him out, if you will.
Right.
There have been many who have demonstrated, who have chosen ways that honored the earth, for example, that honored each other, that honored the God and Goddess within.
Right.
And they've been burned at stakes, they've been persecuted, they've been inquisitored. This is the 2,000 year, this is what's been done.
I was even institutionalized as a teenager because of some. Now, there were two sides of that. One was my experiences, and the other was I put myself in a position that was really not behooving of my own health, and my parents stepped in after I got beat up at a frat house. So, all things being good, it also gave me the insight and compassion for those that others like me and you and those who do have extrasensory perception and may hear voices and aren't schizophrenic and yet are treated as such because now the DSM-4 doesn't have any other, it was a DSM-2 at that time, doesn't have any other explanation for it. So as long as they're working from the book and from their own box, this is how you're going to get labeled. Well, is that healthy? Is it right? Again, it's what is available. That's the best our modern medicine has to offer, and so this is how they're handling it. Well, we're learning that there's more. And in these last few years, like with the work with Bruce Lipton and Greg Braden putting together stuff, and Candace Pert, you know, they're showing that the biology, that we actually can change our biology by how we think.
There is some very, very exciting work out of Russia that involve consciousness itself. It involves the aware and very specific application of consciousness, focusing on numbers, focusing or using sacred geometry.
Right.
Different things to not only restore what we call the norm of the Creator, but we're redefining that, because restoring the norm of the Creator doesn't mean simply getting over that sickness, over the common cold or over the flu of the flu du jour, but it also means correcting some of the effects of our own prior ignorance. That includes
Absolutely.
That includes regeneration of organs that have been removed and things like that. We're redefining what's possible. It always was possible, but we did not believe it was such, and so we didn't live it.
Well, you know, we have to give ourselves some credit for what we have learned. When we first came here, you know, the difference between cosmic consciousness and Christ consciousness is cosmic consciousness is formless. Christ consciousness or Buddha consciousness is in body. So when we first learned how to condense into form, when we had this celestial consciousness that we all know we're stardust. Okay, we're still stardust. We just have, and the consciousness is still there. We haven't developed our intellects to understand that process of condensing into form. We're getting close because now we understand quantum entanglement. And quantum mechanics is beginning, the string theory and all those kinds of things. They're showing, mathematically anyway, the plausibility that these things exist. Then you have folks like me who've been an experiencer all my life that are saying, yeah, it's about time you guys got caught up, you know, and there's more, because there's this movement that's stirring. Evidence of it was the Occupy movement that went around the globe in a matter of weeks of just raising the flag and saying, hey, something's wrong. Didn't necessarily have a plan to fix it, but they're just finally in agreement and en masse that something needs to change. So there's that openness in the thoughtmosphere that's looking for what to do next. Now that we've made it through the 2012,
the
winter.
solstice.
Now, once we made it through the end of time and we're in the new cycle or new time, we've got that opportunity to take a look at that. And like I was saying, that with the framework of the Galactic Federation and what they're sending to us in oh so many ways, to hear that of pulling our heads out of our butts and taking our skill sets and putting them in alignment with what those inner drives are. You know, we all have those gifts, those abilities, those things that are even beyond the skill sets, but work with them in harmony. This is about creating harmony among people and planet. That's our goal. That's the Federation's goal. That's how they've learned. And, you know, there are hundreds and thousands and millions and maybe even billions years older than we are. So they might know something. And if we listened to that, recognizing, especially in this last decade, how we have mismanaged our resources to the point of potential extinction if we don't shift and look at things a little differently and consider, you know, what we're putting into the land, air, water, and ourselves, and which are mostly water, that gives us the possibility to coagulate a whole new environment and living awareness.
So question, relative to the book itself, Zendor the Barbarian.
Zendor the Barbarian.
What is its message?
Well, the message in it is probably threefold. I share my experience. I share my considerations of my experience from the observer and multiple points of view. And I encourage others to share their experience. Because for me to step out and step up and claim these things, even though it's not of my own doing, the only way that I'm able to stand here or sit here in this interview and be comfortable and confident in what I'm saying to you is because not only have I known it inside, it's been mirrored back to me in oh so many ways from others. I don't necessarily understand that. What have I got to lose? And if this is so, what all is possible? And if I am the son of Ashtar and Athena and have this role of organizing the ground crew, what is that? So being able to show from my early years, my midlife, to now in this series of books, you know, Zendor the Barbarian is kind of, I'm not afraid to whack away at anything, and that's the barbarian part. You have to not fear attacking truth, because truth will stand. That's why it's truth. And the more you question something, the more you try and whack away at it from different angles, the better you'll understand it. And the more it will reveal to you, because whatever it is you're doing, there's a consciousness about it as well. And so there's that aspect or potential that we have as conscious beings of asking the questions and linking up and getting the answers and allowing that flow to take place that we aren't necessarily used to because we're in a command and control type environment now and have been for a number of years. That's changing. So in the series of books, then, what it does is it brings to bear, or at least opens up the airwaves to the possibility of things that we can do to learn how to work together, to find ways to collaborate. And I don't want to say this because I'm just saying this. I understand how these things work. Part of my professional life is I facilitate partnering workshops for building road and bridge construction. My last project was the operations and maintenance facility at Luke Air Force Base for the F-35 trainers that they're bringing in. So I have direct experience of how these principles of partnering and collaboration and the processes to bring people to that place actually work. Not 100%. There's always, people and questions and things that come up that you don't anticipate or don't expect. However, the framework and the tools and the ability is always there to embrace those and do something with them that benefits the group and the project. In this case, the end all or the end project is harmony among people and planet. Well, what's that look like? How, it's like the creation wheel that the Shift movement and Thrive movement both share, the 12 aspects of it. That's an example. Okay, now how do each one of those fit together as a holistic system? Okay, we haven't looked at things from a holistic standpoint, at least en masse. There are segments and sections of society, like holistic health, that are looking at things, but then you've got Senge, who brought out the fifth discipline and talked about personal mastery, team building, organization, and systems thinking from a corporate standpoint. How do you get all these things to work together? Okay, and in so doing, what does that do to the rest of the environment, to the communities that they're in? What kind of tools do we have that we can bring to bear on the corporatocracy to help it shift? And one of those has just recently been released. It was put together by members from 90 different countries from the International Standards Organization. It's called the ISO 26000. Okay. Social Responsibility Standards. So these are standards now that people like you and I, or those who work for corporations, it's a 99-page document, they can take that into that corporation, and it's not like the ISO 9000, which is a worldwide certifiable manufacturing quality standard. It's intentional. So it gets people into the act of helping to change their environment, and if people feel empowered, what do you think's possible? If they actually, oh my God, I'd love to do something, but I don't know what to do, and I don't have anything to do it with. Here. What's going to happen with that?
Well, it is a $64 question in many ways, because let me ask you, in what place, or do you see, or how do I say this? In the matrix of players that you see, we've got humanity sitting here. We've got Ashtar and the Galactic Federation. Are there any other players in this drama that are in that you see? Is there a cast that include any others? I mean, you mentioned the word the fact that there are other intelligences who may not be human.
Right.
Do you have any experience with some? And where are they in the matrix?
Well, as with what we've talked about so far, it is multidimensional. Several things I've found. The most practical is on the ground level, that consciousness that exists on the other dimensions as an ET is embodied in physical human bodies here now. Not everyone that I'm aware of. I don't have all the answers, so I'm really not clear on that. I know there are many who know this within themselves. They don't necessarily understand it. And again, this is part of what the book is about, and helping people to ask the right questions of themselves by comparing their experience to mine and similar things that might have happened. Okay, I don't know any other way to do it in that way. In the way of understanding that you may be an extraterrestrial in body. I appear to be. Others, there's a process I call soul gazing, which you sit with another and you look into their eyes and you don't blink and you just gaze and you do your best to be as quiet and silent as possible and just observe what happens. Well, in that process, that face will generally morph. And it may morph into multiple forms. This could be various past lives you've experienced with together, and it also might show up as an extraterrestrial face. Okay? And there's hundreds of races that we could be, because we are all of them here now. And that's part of what I understand. It's part of what I know to share. And as incredulous as it may sound to a right-winger, we're still swinging. And it's a process that we all can engage and learn how to question more openly and be okay with the dissenters and the non-believers and those who question us, and understand that instead of them actually rejecting us, it's the concepts they're rejecting. They don't have the belief system. They don't have the minds that can wrap around that kind of framework that is so far beyond the schooling or experience or intelligence that they may have at the time. And yet still, as I said earlier, when you're talking to those people, you're talking to that part of you that's God inside of them too. And so what I see is that people that have issues or resistance or still have some of their own ego flexing around inside of them, and they're projecting themselves at others, there's this need for vetting. And it goes beyond just pointing the fingers. It goes to allowing a discussion to take place that's not projective, that's inquisitive, that engages active listening. What I thought I heard you say was, and then you can begin to develop that understanding. And even though, maybe not the understanding, the relationship and the openness of it, to where you recognize, we're two human beings that love each other deeply, even though we may not admit it. And what can we do from the center of that place of love together to help each other, even though we may not fully, I may be on this side of the circle and you're on the other side of the circle, but we're still in the circle.
In the context of an infinite universe, infinite possibility, if we take that as a truth, it means that even if one does not see as we see, for example, let's say we see a oneness, we realize that our enemy is or what are thought of as enemies or opposition are simply, again, projections,
right,
of something else, something within us. If there's a oneness, there isn't a superior, there isn't an inferior. But there's
a desirable and undesirable.
Yeah. Well, you could say there's a harmonious and there's a
Discordant.
dissonant.
Right,
Discordant.
right,
Exactly.
right.
You know, take all the judgment out. It's still it's synchronous. It's
Does it
not.
resonate or not?
That's exactly right.
And how do we determine that resonation? What do we have? Forget all the science and the exterior tools and devices and machines and things that we have to monitor and probe and all of the things that we can do from within as good or better. We just don't realize it yet. So, so recognizing that, then what do we have inside? What kind of senses do we have, or do we already have them? You know, we have 5 senses and 10% of our brain. Well, could we have 45 more senses with the other 90% of our brain?
Yep.
That's a simple ratio.
Well, to me, it's a
It makes
slam
sense.
dunk answer. Yes.
Right.
It's true.
Okay. So, and those 5 senses may be with those 9 bodies, and that, you know, divvying it up as 10% each. So, it's funny how things correlate. Potentially, anyway. Even just the possibility makes you think, interesting. So, as those things, as that sensory device that we call our body evolves, we can begin to understand what's going on around us at a more intricate level. For instance, here's the matter of choice. We feel a sensation in our gut. It kind of quivers. Have 2 people doing that, okay? One over here interprets it as anxiety and reacts from a place of I'm going to lose something, or something's going to happen, or, you know, somewhat of a fearful position. On the other hand, you have someone over here that chooses to feel it as a quickening. And they recognize that that sensation means that they ought to be in a place of anticipation of something really cool happening, because that's what happens when that happens. Same thing with the anxious person over here. They draw, because of their anxiety, they draw whatever it is that they're afraid of, because that's where their thought is. Their attention is on that. The person over here that's on the quickening, that's on the anticipation, is much more in a place of joy, because they're anticipating something really cool going to happen. They don't know what, but they know it's going to happen. So there's 2 sides of that same sensation that they feel in their body. So if those exist, and there's at least 2 ways of interpreting that sensation, what else is possible?
Well, the idea of an infinite possibility means that neither have to be wrong, both can be right. Both are creative.
Oh yeah, they're both right here. You've got the one with the anxiety, and you've got one that's a quickening. Okay? Those are valid, truthful, honest experiences that each one of those people are having. It's a matter of choice as to which experience you, or others, the global you, want to have.
The interesting thing is, in this cosmology, as we are beginning to become, I don't say aware of, I think we're coming to a place where we are acknowledging that there are more. I mean, people are seeing sightings of craft frankly, the reportings are happening every day. They're showing up in more places. They're capturing them on tape. And yet we, you got people who are interpreting them in different ways. Some are interpreting them with great anticipation. Some of them are who are in fear, are seeing this as a sign of something, terrible happening, especially greased along with many of our programs on.
You got a butt pucker and enema. It's your choice.
Well, yeah. So we've got a lot of movies and other
things. That's a little more graphic than we needed to get.
Sure. But we've got movies and other things that help grease people along the path of
right.
thinking that this is something sinister. Now, the point basically is that everyone with free will has the ability to see and be who they are, see things as they see it. And I think that the key awareness that's surfacing in this day and time is that the creative power, that we are the creative power, and therefore if a person is seeing this as something to be feared and their worst fears showing up, manifesting, they are free to create it. It does not mean that that is the only thing that will be created.
Right.
So the people who are seeing this as something to look for, they are creating it. We have the power.
At least in the movies. Now, let me take that to the next level, because there's a critical piece that's left out of that. Conversation. Hey, I'm feeling this way. What about you? I see this happening. I'm feeling this way about it. I'm not sure if it's right. What do you think?
Well, if that comes up for people, hallelujah. You see?
Absolutely. And it's that relationship on the ocean of emotion that we submerge because we're afraid to open our mouths to talk for fear of rejection. Now, I know how that feels. When I got out of the hospital, they had me on Thorazine while I was in there, 2,000 milligrams a day. So it was 4 doses in liquid form. I should have been a lump in a corner based on their diagnosis. I was up playing ping pong, beating the male nurses. Okay, so it basically had no effect on me. What it did have is that it destroyed my self-confidence. And so when I got out of the hospital, I literally shook so bad inside that my physical body trembled. Do you know how embarrassing that is? And how debilitating that fear of being rejected by anyone. It could have my parents, my sister, a girlfriend, a high school best friend. Didn't matter. There was that place inside of me that wanted to talk to others and that was afraid to because of what I'd just gone through. Now, I knew I was different. I mean, shoot, I'd done a trampoline act for a halftime show for a high school basketball game in front of 5,000 people. And I was a diver. I was a lifeguard during high school, so I loved to show off. Okay? That was a ham. However, after I went through this, man, I was empty. There was nothing there, and I was afraid of sharing what was going on inside of me. Now, obviously, I've overcome that. Okay? It's taken me 40 years.
And not a moment too soon.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping I'm on time. You know, as a drummer, I've usually had impeccable timing. So maybe I can move that and segue it over into my personal life, too. I hope that's so. I know our meeting and how that came about was very synchronistic and well-timed and beyond us, and with the help of a wonderful woman named Cynthia Crawford. So, in our movement together as a population, as understanding that yes, there's this galactic federation that we may not understand, or that spans many worlds and has hundreds of members and species within it that are incarnate here as human beings that have this internal understanding that they're here to help shift this consciousness and this thoughtmosphere to a new living awareness that over the next 25 years will completely change how we're living on this planet. And we've seen, as we hear
I'm trying to see if I can see if it's a black helicopter or not. It's certainly a helicopter.
Well, there is a helicopter manufacturing facility not too far from here. So
well, that would probably account for there being a helicopter nearby.
yeah. And if they are watching, then good on them.
It's all right.
Yeah, it's all good. So as we evolve on a planetary scale, there's going to be more things come forth. I know just from coming out as I have in the, if you can call it that, over the last few years, there's been others who, all over the globe, who have approached me and recognized that they have something going on with them too, and they're wondering what to do with it, how to do with it. There's a lot of talk. The internet, oh my, there's so much going on there, and to have some discernment with it too. But the conversations are all over the place, and what I hope to see are other individuals who step up and say and redirect those conversations back into, okay, we can't change the world until we get ourselves in tune first. Because the minute you try to push something, you're going to have a resistance. And if you change, it's infectious. Others see it. They want to know what's going on. All of a sudden you walk into some place that's normally, this gloomy atmosphere, and you walk in and you're beaming and you're having fun and you're engaging people. Do you think that's going to change the energy of that atmosphere?
I know it will, sure.
So we have the capacity to do that. And I think it's necessary, imperative, that we step out of our own fears and begin asking those questions of, who am I really? What am I here to do? How can I engage others from that place within me that I know is there, that finds that place in them that's there too?
Well, I think that is, I'm in fact in full agreement with that. If, in a nutshell, what would Zindor like to say to the public as a thought, as a parting thought, or an opening thought, as the case may be?
Well, those questions are most sufficient, I think. Question reality, question your understanding, challenge your beliefs, look for what makes sense, not what's common. So find what makes sense common for you and others that brings you all together and allows you to work together better. It's all going to evolve and change, and be aware of that. Change doesn't happen overnight. There are some things. I have a blog, BeTheDream.info. I've taken the principles of the creation wheel and put it into a little more finite structure from a more practical standpoint with PlanetaryCitizens.net. I have a website that's also sonofashtar.com that I tell more about my story. I have a coaching site, Be the Dream-Life Coach, or you can even put in BeTheDream.com and it'll redirect. I have a partnering website called TeamPartnering.com, and I have a model community/educational village called SpectrumAcademy.org that I wrote as a business plan after teaching and going into my Masters for Organizational Management, that offers a new environment that could potentially be that foundation for the educational reformation that we need. I don't have all the answers. I have a lot of possibilities, and I'm a futurist thinker. I can't help but be that way, because when I was first brought into the there's the two eagles today now that Cynthia had mentioned yesterday. That one was flying around. There's a couple of them flying in a circle. To be able to get out of your own way. I know there was another thought that I was going off, and then I got sidetracked by the eagles. To recognize that we have this capacity, and to begin to reach out to others and find a way to get beyond the discord. You know, we've got several nations and people that are reflecting what's going on in those nations, and the conflict that's happening, and the disempowerment, the inhumane treatment and justice systems that are there. And these are all things that we can and will change, and I believe it's going to happen in the next 25 years. Now there's a group out there that thinks we're going to be evacuated. Can't speak to that. What I can speak to is that my past life, that the last time I was here was 26,000 years ago, when this land became a seabed. And there was an evacuation there. I was in charge of it, or at least for this area. I don't know about the rest of the planet. So that's possible. But like they've demonstrated already when they shut off the missile silos in the 60s, okay, they will keep us from destroying ourselves, but we've got to work out the details.
Good enough. Well, where can one find Zendor the Barbarian?
Visiting a theater near you. Hi, I'm Zendor, and yes, you have been expecting me. Yeah. Actually, it's on Amazon. You can find it on CreateSpace. I have a better profit on CreateSpace than I do Amazon. You can find it on the websites. Okay. And if you just Google Zendor the Barbarian, you'll find it.
All right. Zen Benefel. Zendar Benefel.
Yeah, my friends call me Zen. I'm most comfortable with that.
Zen, thank you for your time, for your vision, for your passion, and for the light that you bring. And let there be more.
I'm just a reflection, Adam. And thank you for being such a bright one.
Thank you very much.
Namaste.
Namaste.